Well, good evening and welcome to this evening's live Facebook discussion regarding the level crossing removal project for Caulfield to Dandenong, and specifically looking at the 22.5 hectares of land which will be generated as a result of this project. My name is Chris Robinson. I'll be your facilitator tonight, hopefully hosting a really in-depth conversation with our panel members who I'll introduce in a moment. Firstly, I'm joined by Mr. Tim Entwistle, Professor Tim Entwistle, Chair of COSEP. Good evening, Tim. We have also Sophie Patsias from the Victorian Government Architect Office. Is that right?
Thank you, Chris. It's Sophie Patsias. Yep.
Patsias,
yep.
Very good. I knew I was going to get this. Yeah, we'll see how we go. Tim Griffin from the Level Crossings Removal Authority. Thank you. And Matthew, one of our 4 community members on COSEP. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Tonight's event will go live for 20 or so minutes and we'll be answering as many questions as we can through this evening. Questions have been coming through prior to this evening's event, and also we invite you to post your questions online live as we go through this evening. We invite you also to share tonight's video to make sure that maximum number of people can have an opportunity to participate this evening. Now, we may not have an opportunity to answer every question, but we certainly will encourage you to get online afterwards and continue the conversation about an important part of Melbourne's new public open space infrastructure. For those who've just joined us, welcome, and we're here with some members from Community Open Space Panel, and we've received some questions earlier regarding the open space area. So first, the questions came through this evening from Danica Dalton, and she asks, near Clayton, what family park areas will be provided? And it's a changing demographic area, and I don't think that's been considered enough in the planning. And what have young people and young families how have they been considered as part of this process? So perhaps Tim to start with, and then maybe Sophie. Would that be right?
Yep. Yeah. So we've been working closely with local councils. So in Clayton, the City of Monash, and also the other members of the Community Open Space Expert Panel to understand the needs of the local communities. Both for now and also into the future. So we're trying to design the spaces such that they cater for all those needs. Being near transport hubs, and particularly Clayton, also considering the people moving through the precincts, so that will want to stop and use the spaces that we're designing. So particularly at Clayton, that's the Monash Medical Precinct and Monash Uni. So trying to consider all those people that are going to use the spaces. So not just for families, but for everyone. So we're really taking an intergenerational approach to the design. So they're not just for one particular user. We're trying to design them such that a range of people can use them, and at the same time as well. So at Clayton, that could be a spot to just sit and gather, or we're also looking at potentially sports courts in the area that could perhaps second as an event space or a market space as well. So a bit of flexibility in the design. And some potentially some outdoor gym equipment as well that again could be for adults or could be for kids to just sort of muck around on.
Thanks, Tim. Sophie, from a perspective of youth and young families, what's the design response do you think that COSEP have been considering during this process?
Well, I mean, Tim's really picked up on a lot of the issues that have come up in COSEP, and it's really about catering to a range of age groups, and I think that scale is very important, having focused activity, maximising opportunities for connections. They're the sorts of things that we're really trying to address and think about in the design, and we've got a great team of designers really thinking about that and responding to expert advice from council, from consultants in that space that really talk to intergenerational play. So Aaron Wallace has been coming to the panel sessions and giving us expert advice on that. So I think the panel discussion that has taken place has really taken that on board, and that's and we really are talking to a range of age groups really in terms of the way we design the spaces.
Yeah, terrific, thank you.
Yep.
We'll try to get through as many questions as if we can, panel. Mary Kelly Harper has previously asked, perhaps this is a question to you, Professor Tim, how many mature trees will you be putting back into the space to replace the ones you've removed, and how mature will they be? Perhaps both Tims could have a go at that question. Tim G, maybe?
Yeah, well, we're going to be planting thousands of new trees. Obviously, with the train lines being elevated, it creates a much bigger ground plane in which to work with and to plant new trees. So There'll be a range of things that will go into whether the size of the trees when they go in, and perhaps Tim can talk to that a little bit. But we certainly look to get a range of plant sizes at the start, and we're sort of in that process now of trying to find and source the mature plants that sort of already need to be in existence and already growing for us to purchase them. So, but that'll just be in selected areas, and we will have some small plants as well. So.
Professor Tim, your role at the Royal Botanic Gardens, you've seen lots of challenges with trees, old and new. What's some of your insights about how do we deal with that on this particular project?
Well, look, the community is fascinated and always interested in trees. So it's the variety you have, and we get some people that love to have Australian native trees and some like exotic. So the planning here, though, which I think is great, is to have different trees for different places, but also picking the age, because you mentioned the size of the trees. And it's really important to get a tree established and to get it to grow a long time. And to do that, you don't want them too big. So there's a temptation to replace a really big old tree with a large tree, but it's great if we can get them in a bit smaller, get them going. There's thousands of new trees and lots of opportunities for some really creative planting.
Morrison from online has just posted a question. Can we have pine trees, please?
Can we have pine trees? Well, see, that's a great example, because you'll get the next question will be, can we have eucalypts? And it's this great sort of tension, if you like, between different people's love of different trees. One of the things that came through too was habitat for wildlife, for birds. So pine trees probably not perfect in that sense, but some pines are really attractive. So we are going to have a mix, and that's based on feedback and what we can plant near elevated rail too. So we have to be careful about the constraints, but also take the opportunity to plant interesting trees.
Terrific. One of the challenges with this project is, of course, the car park element. Cheryl Boyne has previously posted this question: how many new car parks will be added? So Tim G, from a project perspective, you're from Level Crossings Removal Authority, what's the view on that?
Yep. Well, I've been on the project for over 12 months now, and I don't think I've had a discussion about the project that hasn't involved parking yet. It's a hotly debated topic, and it's come up in COSEP several times, where we've debated between that tension between having more car parks, because we certainly hear that from the community that more car parks are desired, but balancing that against the car parks taking up some of the open space and the parkland that we're trying to create. So we're certainly committed to providing more car parks, and we'll certainly endeavour to do that, and looking for places for those to go at the moment, but sort of working with that tension, I suppose, and trying to find the most appropriate spots for them.
Yeah, terrific. And I would remind everyone who's watching on Facebook, do let us know, get your questions in. The purpose is to provide you an opportunity to ask real-time questions, so please. And for those who've just joined us, we're with COSEP members regarding the Community Open Space panel for the Caulfield to Dandenong Level Crossing Removal Project, and we're hearing from members of the panel. Matthew, one of the community members, welcome of course. Your thoughts on car parks and views as to community views, and what are you hearing with regard the balance between open space and car parks?
Yeah, it's interesting dynamic. I think certainly no net loss would be something that's very important to the community members, and I think it's very important for it to be a very convenient space. So if that was some car parking opportunities, sure, but it is important for those to be used so that they're not just sitting there like slabs of concrete that are disutilised over the weekend, which is currently the situation, particularly Noble Park, where it's crying out for a big public space, and there's a lot of car parks there. So it will be interesting to see like how those car spaces can be used as opportunities in the future, where they could also be recreation zones or spaces not utilised over the weekend. For example, some really great examples of just market spaces in Ferntree Gully. Could we do the same in our area? So essentially, look, no net loss. If there are opportunities, they'll be really, really great. Certainly the traders would like that as well. But it would be a real shame for the entire area around the trade station to be taken up by car spaces.
Thank you, Matthew. Professor Tim.
I was just going to add to that. It was one of the great topics during the panel discussions about you've got to have a certain number of car parks, and people want car parks. But on the weekends there might not be as many commuters in there.
That's right.
How do we use those? How do we integrate? We were talking about trees and plants before. How do we sort of make that sort of stretch or sort of look like it goes into the car park? So I think they're the kind of creative solutions were things we talked about a lot in the panel.
That's right.
And we talked a lot about blending, actually, because one of the great benefits of this project is actually the linear park and the linear spaces and the active spaces. So we talked about not necessarily doing one or the other. Actually, there is a balance and there's a tension, and it's just trying to then the concept that came through in COSEP is the idea of blending. Yeah.
One of the other things I remember speaking to you both earlier about the areas of community open space, well, shared user path, which is a big element. And we've had some questions come through. A few people have voiced their concern that the shared user path might be in fact dangerous. Why has the project decided to opt for shared use paths rather than separating pedestrian and cycle paths? And perhaps over to the panel. Tim, maybe what are your views on that, and how has the project addressed those concerns?
Yep. Yeah, I guess as Alex showed, we chose the shared path because we think it will be safe. And so it'll be a 3 metre wide path, so roughly the width of sort of your average road traffic lane, I suppose. There's certainly areas where there's high pedestrian activity. We know that around the station precincts and the entries to the stations, people walking to and from their cars in the car park. So there will be select areas where we recognise the need to have a separate footpath due to those sort of high conflict areas. But through the linear park, we think it's a safe and good outcome to have a shared use path. Great.
Tim, you also mentioned earlier about the special nature of trees, and there's been a lot of conversation about the river red gums. And I know, Matthew, many community members have said the same. A number of them have to be removed as part of the project to make way for the structures. Communities expressed a fondness for those trees, and is the project able to replace the river red gums? Is it appropriate, and what are your thoughts?
Well, look, personally, I love river red gums, and I can see why the community loves them. They're just one of those fantastic trees in that area. So we have had to take, or the trees have to be taken out to build the structures. When we put them back, it's hard to actually put river gums back. They do have problems, so they do drop limbs. They're kind of a difficult tree in a public space, even though they're a beautiful tree. So in some places, I imagine we'll be able to put some back in. Other places we can put alternatives. We can put native trees and that are the same wildlife, that have the same look. There are manna gums and other trees that look a bit similar, but a little bit better in public spaces. And also we can try for other kinds of vegetation. So yeah, look, like anyone else, you miss an old tree, but this is an opportunity to plant in a new forest, a new urban forest if you like, and to really be sort of creative about what we want out of that forest. It might not be all river red gums, because that is tough, but we can put some other trees as well.
In the time we have left, ladies and gents, please remember, get your questions through. We're running out of time, but Facebook Live is a great opportunity for you to pose the questions. One has come through, Sophie, and perhaps Tim G as well. We all love fruit. Is it possible to have edible gardens, community gardens along this area? I mean, from your experience at the government office.
Look, I think we've actually seen that happen in other areas, actually, near railway stations, actually. And I think it's possible. It's just really an issue of making that work, and if it's viable as well, and it's near that environment. I think I have to turn to the experts here, actually.
Well, look, it is difficult. I think it's a great challenge to take up, to try and do some edible gardens, particularly if the community wants it. So in the panel we have council representatives, we have community representatives, and it does in certain areas. I think that might work. So if you've got a strong community group that's going to look after them and deal with them, plant them, all that kind of thing, it might work. It's again, I think as part of a mix, why not?
Yeah, why not? And if we can make it work, it's basically creating the conditions that will enable that to happen, and then actually for the community to have ownership of that. And obviously, if they're interested, they want it, then that is a part of the ownership thing.
Yeah, but it's going to take. I would say, Chris, it's one of those things that the community is going to have to want to do. It's going to be planting big trees and sort of gardens you can look after. For that sort of thing, it's going to need that strong community ownership.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree. I think it is a great idea, but we do really. So any sort of those sort of concepts really need to be spoken a little bit more with the community, so they can kind of get their head around how to manage this into the future. It's a really nice idea. Anything that brings the community together is a good idea.
Time is getting away from us, but there's one interesting question, perhaps Tim G. Car parking, can it go underground?
It certainly can. Anything's possible. Obviously, with the elevated structure, There's still an element of infrastructure that's underground. We've got piles and piles caps that are holding up our piers, so there's some limitations there. Look, we don't think it's the right outcome for our spaces that we're designing. As Sophie said, we're trying to design the car parks such that they blend into the linear parks as well. So we are still including quite a lot of trees within the car park area. So again, something underground might pose restrictions to that. So yeah, it's a good idea, but not something we're pursuing at the moment. Yep.
Okay. Tim, any other reflections before we wrap up tonight about COSEP process, about the recommendations that you hope to make as the chair?
Well, I think this discussion is reflected quite nicely, the sort of the things we discuss, and also that there are different points of view out there. So I think when the test will be what's produced, and I think the test of COSEP and how well we've worked together will be what you actually see, the parkland that's created, how these car parks look. But there are compromises, and I think that's what I've learned through the process too. It isn't a botanic garden, but it's going to be a wonderful new parkland and linear park for Melbourne, and what an opportunity to get it right.
And whilst it's not a parkland, there are some very large structures occurring. Joe has asked the question, can we do some vegetation on the pylons? Can we, in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and Malaysia, there's lots of the greening of infrastructure. What are our thoughts on that, Tim, and perhaps Tim G as well?
Yeah, well, I might let Tim talk a little bit to it as well, but I guess one of the considerations from an engineering point of view is the integrity of the structures, and they're serving a valuable purpose of holding up the train line. So we certainly wouldn't be able to compromise that. And there's some other things around maintenance, just being able to inspect the things, potentially things that can be overcome. But there are some other challenges that have come up in COSEP that we've talked about, which I might let Tim talk to a little bit.
We're trying to find ways to do this. This is one of these discussions we've had where it's about, the engineers require certain things for the structures to inspect them. The plant people and people like myself would love to see more creepers and climbers, and they do them overseas in some countries. So I think where we'll get to is we'll find an opportunity to do some, maybe not on the pillars, but we haven't talked about artwork yet, but I think there's some great opportunities on the pillars.
Yes, we can come back another night and talk about that.
Yeah, maybe that. But look, it's really, again, trying to find ways to do that, and it might, and there are challenges always in sort of debating these things with the engineers versus the strong plant people.
And the architects. Actually, yes. Well, I was just going to say actually, because the design team have been working so hard actually to make sure that the structures and the stations are really well designed, and they do stand the test of time. So actually there are a few layers to this conversation. There's the linear park, there's the architectural outcome, and there's the landscape architecture as well. It's all supposed to hopefully come together to create something that Melbourne will be proud of.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid time has got away from us tonight. Thank you all very much for joining us. Our panellists tonight, Sophie, Professor Tim, Matthew and Tim. From the team here at Level Crossings Authority, thank you very much for joining us. If you wish to keep the conversation alive, please get online and let us know your thoughts and views. Thank you for tonight, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.